Ista ona autostrada, pakla i stradanja kojom su pošli Slovenija i Hrvatska. Nemojte da mislite da nećete odvesti Bosnu i Hercegovinu u pakao, a muslimanski narod možda u nestanak. Jer muslimanski narod ne može da se odbrani ako bude rato.
I am about to pray the Janazah Salah of bodies who died 10 years before I was even born. This is communist Yugoslavia, situated here in Eastern Europe. It violently broke up into pieces during the 1990s, but it once included the nations of Bosnia and also Kosovo. These are two of Europe's largest population of indigenous Muslims. Yet for over 50 years, that status would be threatened. This is a story of how nationalist thugs, with the help of many others, attempted to erase Islam from Europe. This documentary film will take you on a journey across Bosnia, featuring powerful stories and special guest appearances. But before we continue, be sure to subscribe to the Five Pillars YouTube channel to never miss an upload.
It would reach its climax with the massacre at Srebrenica.
They were scenes few thought were still possible.
From July 1995, the largest genocide in Europe since World War II is perpetrated in the mountain passes of Srebrenica. Areas which were predominantly Bosniak were purified and emptied, with a number of murdered in the thousands. And today, those areas are still under the control of the Serb perpetrators.
Soldiers slaughtered more than 7,000 Muslim men and boys.
By Bosnian Serb soldiers, they filmed these pictures of their handiwork. And this man, Asmir, is aged just 16. Then they lie down, surely knowing what awaits.
Probably when I saw the dead people around in front of me and the people who were dying, I was shocked, and I don't remember when I was hit, but I was hit in fact in my stomach with 3 bullets in my right arm, left foot. At the time I just wanted to die, and I prayed God to die.
I am in the town of Srebrenica. Today it's a ghost town. It's almost left untouched since 1995. So I'm going to tell the cameraman soon to pan to the right. On the right of me now is a church, and right now they're having a party on the church, and it's the 11th of July. It's a very symbolic church because all the mosques in this area were destroyed, but that church was left. And every 11th of July, every eve of the 11th of July, they play their Serbian war music, which basically commemorates the war criminals as war heroes. And right now, they're literally having a party on the church. And a thing you might notice if you follow me, let's walk a little bit away from there. I don't feel safe here. It's very eerie, the atmosphere here is very tense. Buildings destroyed. You know, you can truly see what transpired in this town, the destruction which was caused upon the Muslims. Another thing to note, you might have seen that there were children amongst the people in the party on that church. They also like to get their families and their children involved in the newer generation in a way of indoctrinating them with the same ideas that Muslims were never here. And it's never been repaired because there's nobody here to repair it. There's very little people that want to invest in this place after it was destroyed by the Serbs. I mean, to be honest, I have to keep my voice down because this whole area is full of Serbs. Okay, we have to go. But the dancing at the church on the anniversary of the Srebrenica genocide wasn't just the only sickening thing which I witnessed during my time in the Srpska. Upon my drive back to Sarajevo at night, I drove past a gang of young kids waving a large Serbian flag with fire torches in their hands, aggressively swearing at the Muslims who were driving by. While I couldn't get the chance to capture it because I was driving, this image is a visual representation of the scene. And scenes like this were dotted across the entire road going back. Another reminder that the anti-Muslim rage espoused during the 1990s is still ever present in Serb-occupied Bosnia. Yes, this is exactly what it looks like. A destroyed house of Allah, one of Bosnia's many ghost mosques. This was once the Azam Mosque, built in the 1980s. In fact, one of my audience members, actually her granddad, built this mosque. His name was Azam, and they named it after him, after his noble act of donating whatever he had and mustering the community, the Muslim community here in the area around Srebrenica to build this mosque. However, during the 1990s, when the Serb onslaught entered the region of Srebrenica, they destroyed every single mosque. Not a single mosque was spared. In fact, not just here in Srebrenica, but of course across Bosnia, 900 mosques, mektebs, places of worship were singled out systematically as a strategy of war and destroyed. A way of ethnically cleansing the Muslim influence here in this country. And not only was it destroying Muslim influence, it was destroying Muslim history. So the Serb militants planted explosives inside the minaret, which today is of course reconstructed. And of course the mosque itself is slowly starting to regain its shape. However, they planted the explosives inside the minaret and the minaret collapsed, it blew up, destroying the mosque surrounding it. I understand that we've not really discussed why Bosnia was sent to the Dark Ages during the 90s. When Bosnia wanted to leave communist Yugoslavia in 1992, well, the Serbs weren't too happy. Serb President Slobodan Milosevic wanted to carve for himself a greater Serbian state out of the dying Yugoslavia. He waged a bloody campaign in majority Catholic Croatia, Kosovo, Slovenia, and even Bosnia. And so, because around 40% of Bosnians were Orthodox Serb, they commenced a campaign to purify the region of Bosniaks to help forge this greater Serbian state. They incite old ethnic tensions, essentially sparking a crusade against the very culture and the way of life which had been in Europe for 5 centuries. And to understand Bosnian tradition and culture a little bit more, Sarajevo is my quintessential starting point. Look at this, snow in Bosnia. Look what I've just spotted here, just on the random. Holy crap, look at that. Oh yeah, the UN. Thank you. Okay, so introduce yourself. So what is your name? And
Mehdi Babic, and I was born in 1978 in Sarajevo. I was 13. I was a child, I play, and I know when bombing stopped, we go to street to play. Old City is famous because there are a lot of mosques, and the most population was Muslim, and this part of the city was the most grenaded. They bombed like houses, but especially as a mosque. During that time, people immediately rebuilt.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan But the Serbs didn't do this on their own. Of course, the Greeks, along with other Christian Orthodox nations of the East, would actually supply the Bosnian Serb forces not only with manpower, but also with substantial amount of weapons. But there was also another nation, which was the paymaster, or one of the paymasters of the Bosnian Serb forces, and they were none other than Israel. It wasn't really much of a surprise to know that Serbia and also the Israelis, 2 genocidal states, were working in cahoots with one another during the 1990s. Mossad, of course, the intelligence, the secret intelligence of Israel, they were particularly active in the Balkans during this time. They would arrange huge and substantial amounts of weapons shipments to Bosnian Serb forces, weapons such as mortar shells, things which... Assalamu alaikum, no problem, no problema. things which were dropped on the people of Sarajevo, the Muslims, were the same mortar shells which are today still being bombed and dropped on Muslims, but this time the Muslims of Gaza. And many of the people in Sarajevo actually witnessed themselves firsthand that many of the unexploded mortar shells, they had Hebrew writing on them, indicating that they were supplied by, of course, Israel. Professor Aldrich also recalls this, and many of the first-hand witnesses in Sarajevo actually attest to the fact that Serb soldiers were carrying Israeli-made weapons. Mini Uzis were a particularly famous weapon that were used by Bosnian Serb forces. But you may be wondering, why on earth are the Israelis, other than the fact that they hated Muslims, why would they align themselves with the Bosnian Serb forces? Well, there was one very clear reason, and that was because Sarajevo actually had a huge percentage of Jews that were still living there. Of course, during the Ottoman times, the Ottomans had a policy of religious tolerance. Sarajevo itself was famous for being the European Jerusalem. And so the Israelis would supply the Bosnian Serb forces with munitions, weapons, and also generals and advisors in exchange for safe passage of the Jews in the besieged city of Sarajevo. You know, these Jewish people abandoning their home, abandoning the front to save their own city, and they would then go off to Israel, where they still reside till this day. And Miladic, of course, the commander of the Bosnian Serb forces, he wrote in his diary, and I quote, "From Israel, they offer joint combat against extreme Islam. They offer training of our men in Greece at their expense, and they offer us special weapons for 500 men, snipers for free." So when journalists actually wanted to investigate the connections between Israel and its trade to the Bosnian Serb forces, the genocidal Bosnian Serb forces during the 1990s, they actually refused to give any information as a way to cover, of course, the dubious activities that they were involved with during this time. And to dissect this comparison a little further, I sat down with the only man I knew who could give insight into the comparison between Israel and Serbia, Imam Omar Suleiman. And the first question I asked the Imam was 5 words that he could give that would show the similarities between the Bosnian genocide and the Gazan genocide.
The first word is rape. I think the worst abuse that can be committed by a human being against another human being is that. The women here will consistently say they asked for death and instead they were raped. And we've seen systematic rape in the prisons in Palestine with our hostages, and they're our hostages. While the Israelis accuse the Palestinians, the Israelis rape the Palestinians. We've seen it multiple times now. The second one is theft of land, right? So the people of Bosnia owned over 90% of the land. The Muslims owned over 90% of the land 100 years ago, but systematically they've been disenfranchised from their land, and they only are 20% landowners now. And there's abandonment. Many people abandoned Bosnia in the moment of need and only came to claim the spoils later on. There is disconnect of territory, right? So the Serbs made sure that there was no continuity or flow of power between the Bosnians. And then finally there's faith. What makes us different is our faith. The Serbs could not take it from the Bosnians. The Zionists could not take it from the Palestinians. We're a people of La ilaha illallah. If they break our bodies, if they hack us with machetes, if they bomb us, if they starve us, they can't take away La ilaha illallah from us. And that's why we will always stand strong, inshallah, until at the end of it all. So the Zionists, essentially, they took the siege of Sarajevo as a playbook for what they would do to Gaza, because the siege of Sarajevo was in the 1990s and the siege of Gaza happened in the early 2000s. And they would literally, take notes of how the Serbs would cut off water, they would cut off electricity, they would cut off any food going in, they would destroy masajid, they would destroy anything which resembled Muslim architecture as a way of reducing their history to rubble, suggesting that they were never there. Muslims were never in Europe. And similarly today, they are removing any evidence that Palestinians were in the land of Palestine. Removing their masajid, removing their educational institutions. The largest book burning in modern history happened here in Sarajevo, not too far from where I am today. The largest book burning. And that was because the books contained many evidence that Muslims, Christians, and all the other faiths of Sarajevo lived together in Bosnia, in cohesion. And similarly today in Gaza, that's also being erased, the educational institutions and many other such institutions. You know, is it a danger that things like July 11th, the commemoration, becomes more about public optics as opposed to actual change of the ground mobilization? Yes. It's a huge danger. You should use this moment to shed light on the plight, not merely immerse yourself in the moment. That was my message today. That's been my message while I'm here. That's my message to the world from here, is the eyes and the hearts still need to remain on Bosnia and in Bosnia. It is very much so connected to everything that's happening. And we absolutely risk the falling into the cycle of symbolism and ceremony. It's not who we are. And our enemies would be very happy if all we do is memorialize our losses rather than try to regain what we've lost.
The deliberate attempt to erase Islam from Europe was not just limited to the cities of Sarajevo or Srebrenica, because in Banja Luka, all 16 mosques were destroyed. In the city of Mostar, 12 out of the 14 mosques were leveled. In the single town of Foka, 12 mosques systematically torched. And in Visegrad, the Muslim city without Muslims, all the mosques, including many of the citizens, were ceremonially slaughtered. These cities are just but a few examples. That brings us back to Srebrenica. Today is the 30th memorial for the events which took place here in July 1995. It is currently 2:27 and we have to go to Srebrenica at 2:28, even though the ceremony is in the noon of the 11th, Friday. So, I mean, there's a bunch of diplomats that have already come, so it's going to be a big event. Assalamu alaikum fellas, we're currently about 30 minutes away from Srebrenica and I wanted to show you this mosque. So this mosque is actually an old Ottoman mosque and it dates a couple hundred years old. So this mosque during the Bosnian War, like many of the mosques, in fact 900 mosques, as we mentioned earlier in this documentary, were destroyed systematically by the Serb forces. It wasn't, by chance, it was by design that they destroyed mosques like this. And it's a very beautiful mosque, actually. It's a typical Balkan Ottoman mosque. Now the Ottomans would always build their own style of mosques in different areas of the world, and they would make them in accordance to the customs and the traditions of the place. And this was one of the many very traditional Balkan mosques, and sadly it was destroyed, flattened to the ground. And of course, after the war in the early 2000s, it was rebuilt and repaired and renovated back almost into what it exactly looked like. However, it still misses the memories that were cherished once in this mosque. So it was built in 1643. That's 400 years ago. Then it was destroyed in 1993, and then, alhamdulillah, in 2010, it was rebuilt. It's currently 5:56 a.m. We've finally reached Potočar, the place in which the burial ceremony will happen, the janaza. And even at such an early time, number one, as we mentioned, we see a bunch of Serbian police, and number two, these people are here to intimidate. There's no other reason for it. They're here to show you who's in charge. Every couple of meters there's a Serb policeman where it's probably not needed. Once again, just to intimidate you and just to show you who's truly in power in this entity which was founded on genocide. So we finally found a parking space. We're here early, so there's obviously a lot of parking spaces, but you can imagine people here have camped, literally camped here. SubhanAllah. Some people have stayed here overnight just because of the fact that it's going to get really, really rammed today. This year, 7 martyrs will be buried here in the 30th anniversary of the Srebrenica genocide, including 2 19-year-olds, Haris and Sinaid, who will be buried amongst others, such as a Bosniak elderly woman will be burying her own mother, Fatih Bektić, who was 64 when she was killed. She was shelled by Serb artillery fire, and they had no idea for 30 years the whereabouts of her body. And alhamdulillah, within the last couple years, they were able to find her remains, and hopefully now finally letting her rest and buried once final time. Of course, this time in dignity. Last time she was buried, it was buried in terror and violence. And the body behind me is Hasib Umrovic. As you can see, the grave is prepared for him, and his soul and his body, will be buried here today. Hasib Umrovic was actually 34 years old when he was brutally killed. And he wasn't just killed, he was tortured like the many other people here in Srebrenica. And his body was found in 1998. However, the family, because there was so little remains of our dear brother Hasib behind us, they wanted to wait a couple of years, maybe a decade, to find more of his remains. Because what the Serbs did was that they not only buried them into primary graves, they would dig them up, they would chop their body parts limb by limb. And after doing so, they would then put them into secondary graves. And after putting them into secondary graves, they would then dig them up, and over the course of the next couple of weeks after that, they would put them into tertiary graves. It was their way, essentially, of hiding any evidence that these people were killed. But, Allah plans, they have a plan, and truth has prevailed. And Hasib today will be buried amongst the many other that will be buried here today.
Scenes similar to Judgment Day, mothers wailing, the grief in the family's eyes, the sun beating down, the fields upon fields of people wandering above the bodies already buried beneath. When the caskets were laid down into the graves, I realized how similar this was to any ordinary funeral. The shovels, the dirt, the crowd eagerly assisting the process, the tense sound of digging, the rushed and stressed voices passing instructions back and forth. But this was no ordinary funeral. This was the funeral for victims of genocide that, although was not long ago, was older than I. Beyond the slogans of vowing to never forget, beyond the public optics, there remains a deeply urgent and uncomfortable lesson to pay heed to: the hatred for Islam and Muslims.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Salih Ahmetovic.
And tell me about the grave that you're currently at. Who is it to you?
This is my father's grave.
To truly remember Srebrenica is to live consciously, aware of the ever-shifting narrative against Islam and Muslims, and to offer what you can, first to recognize that reality, and then to defend against it.
His name is Salko. I was little when that was happened, about 7 years, but I still have some memories.
And what is your best memory?
I was little, but my father used to take me for my hand and take me to school when he get to work. That's what I remember the most.